You know, most of us, we go about our lives, we work, we shop, we pay the bills, and we don't often stop to question the whole economic system itself. But what if we could? What if we could just design it all from scratch? What values would we even build it on? Well, today we're digging into a book that tries to do exactly that. It's called Parecon, Life After Capitalism, and it lays out a really provocative blueprint for a totally different kind of economic world.
So the book kicks things off with his really foundational idea from Noam Chomsky. It takes this instinct for freedom as its philosophical jumping-off point. The whole vision we're about to explore is built on this one single belief, that deep down, people want to be in the driver's seat of their own lives and do work that actually means something, not just punch a clock and follow orders.
And that right there leads us to the biggest question in the entire book. I mean, if we accept that premise, that people have this deep-seated desire for freedom and self-direction, then what kind of economy would we actually build? What kind of rules and institutions would feed that instinct, instead of stamping it out? This is the challenge that Parecon really sets out to tackle. Okay, so here's our roadmap for this explainer, and we're going to follow the book's logic pretty closely. First up, we need to figure out what even makes an economy good in the first place. Then we'll look at the 5 key values the authors propose as a kind of yardstick. We'll use that yardstick to see how today's economies stack up. After that, we'll dive into the actual blueprint for Parecon. We'll even try to imagine how a year of economic planning might work, and then of course, we'll tackle that huge question that always comes up. What about human nature?
So, first things first, what does make an economy good? The book really pushes us to look beyond the usual stuff like GDP numbers or how the stock market is doing. It argues that we need to think way deeper about the human and social values an economy should actually be promoting.
This quote from Martin Luther King Jr. just perfectly captures the book's challenge to us. It's not about putting band-aids on the problems of the system we have. It's about looking at the fundamental structure, the edifice itself, that creates those problems to begin with.
We usually think of the economy as just this machine, right? For making stuff and moving it around. But the authors argue it's so much more than that. It's like a giant school that we're all enrolled in from the day we're born. The places we work, the markets we use, they're all constantly teaching us. They reward certain kinds of behavior and punish others. And in doing so, they literally shape our personalities, what we're good at, and even what we think is important in life.
All right, so if the economy is always shaping us, the next big question is, what should it be shaping us into? And to answer that, the book gives us this 5-point yardstick, a set of core values that we can use to judge any economic system out there. Let's take a look.
First up is equity, and you really got to pay attention to this specific definition. In this model, equity is not everyone getting paid the same. It means you get rewarded for your effort and your sacrifice. So how long you work, how hard you work, and how draining or dangerous the conditions are. A coal miner working long, tough hours might actually get more than a brain surgeon working in a comfy office for less time. The key here is what it doesn't reward. Things you can't control, like owning property, having a ton of power, or just being born with some incredible talent that lets you produce a lot without breaking a sweat.
The second value is self-management. This is the big rule for how decisions get made. And it's not just one person, one vote for every little thing. It's a much smarter, more flexible idea. Basically, if a decision affects you a whole lot, you should get a whole lot of say. If it barely touches your life, you get very little say. Think about it. The decision to put a photo on your own desk, that's all you. But the decision to blast music from that desk, well, that affects your coworkers, so they get a say too.
Third is solidarity. The book asks a simple question. Does our economy turn life into a gladiator pit where we're all fighting each other, or does it encourage us to care about each other? A good economy, it argues, should make our interests intertwined. My getting ahead shouldn't have to come at your expense. The whole system should be set up so that for me to do better, you have to do better too. Fourth on the list is diversity. The authors make the case that variety isn't just nice to have, it's essential. It makes our lives richer, and it's also a kind of insurance policy against everyone making the same mistake at the same time. We don't want an economy that funnels everyone into the same kinds of jobs or the same way of life. A healthy system should be a garden with 1,000 different flowers, not a single monoculture crop. And finally, number 5, efficiency. But hold on. This isn't the kind of efficiency you might be thinking of, like just maximizing profits no matter the cost. It's about achieving our goals, the goals set by those other 4 values, without wasting stuff we care about, like our planet's resources, our time, or our own potential.
The crucial thing to get here is that efficiency is the servant, not the master. It helps us achieve equity and solidarity. It doesn't get to trample all over them.
Okay, so now we have our 5-point yardstick. This is where the book turns a critical eye on the big economic systems we're all familiar with, modern capitalism and the centrally planned socialism of the 20th century. So, how do they measure up against these values?
The book's critique of capitalism is pretty sharp, but it also points out that these kinds of deep criticisms aren't new. It even quotes famous economists like John Maynard Keynes. I mean, this is one of the architects of modern capitalism, and even he had this profound dissatisfaction with the system's moral and practical results.
This table, right here, this is the core of the whole critique. Let's just walk through it. Against equity, the book says capitalism fails because it rewards owning stuff and having power, while 20th century socialism just created a new elite, a coordinator class of planners and managers who got rewarded for their powerful positions. On self-management, well, both are top-down. One is ruled by owners, the other by central planners. For solidarity, capitalism's competition creates a dog-eat-dog world, while central planning created a culture of just obeying orders. And on efficiency, the authors argue that capitalism is hugely wasteful because firms externalize costs. That's a fancy way of saying they dump their problems, like pollution, on the rest of us. And central planning? It was plagued by not having good information. So the book's conclusion is pretty stark. Both systems fail, and they fail across the board.
So the really crucial point here is this. The book isn't blaming bad people for these failures. It's blaming the core institutions. It's saying that things like private ownership of factories, the corporate division of labor, markets, and central planning, they are just hardwired to produce outcomes that go against these very human values, no matter how good the people in charge are.
So this critique naturally leads to the big question. If the old blueprints are so busted, is there another way? And this is where the book switches gears, moving from critique to construction. It proposes a whole new model it calls participatory economics, or Parecon for short, that's designed from the ground up to actually serve those 5 values we talked about.
So what are the main ingredients of this new system? Well, first, instead of private or state ownership, you have what the book calls a productive commons. Basically, the factories and resources belong to everyone and no one. They're stewarded by society. Second, big decisions are made in democratic councils of workers and consumers. Third, jobs are totally redesigned into something called balanced job complexes, and we'll get into that in a second. Fourth, like we said, you get paid for your effort and sacrifice. And finally, figuring out who gets what isn't done through markets or by some central committee, but through a new process called participatory planning. Put it all together, and the goal is an economy with no class divisions.
Okay, let's zoom in on one of the most radical ideas in the whole book, balanced job complexes. The authors argue that the way we normally divide up labor creates a class system right inside the workplace. You have about 20% of people, the managers, engineers, doctors, who get all the empowering, interesting, confidence-building tasks, and then you have the other 80% who get the jobs that are mostly repetitive, obedient, and frankly, disempowering. Parecon's solution is to balance it out. Every single job becomes a mix of both empowering tasks and the more routine stuff. So, a surgeon might spend part of her week performing surgery and another part helping to clean the operating room or handling basic administrative work. The idea is to make sure everyone develops the skills and confidence they need to participate fully in self-management.
And where do people use all this newfound empowerment? Well, it happens in these worker and consumer councils. These are the real engines of the economy. Workers at a bicycle factory form a council to run their own workplace. People in a neighborhood form a consumer council to figure out what they need. And then these councils link up, forming federations at the city level, the regional level, and so on. They become the democratic skeleton of the entire economy.
Now, I know what you're probably thinking. This all sounds fascinating, but how does anything actually get done? Without bosses or the stock market, how do we decide what to make and who gets it? Let's try to walk through the book's system for this. Participatory planning.
The book pictures this as a kind of giant, cooperative negotiation that happens over a few weeks each year. Here's the simplified version. Step 1. Every worker council puts forward a proposal for what they want to produce, and every person and consumer council proposes what they want to consume. Step 2. All of that data gets crunched by what are called facilitation boards. They then calculate indicative prices for everything. Now, these aren't market prices. Think of them more like scores that reflect the true social and environmental costs of making something. Step 3. Everyone sees this feedback.
You might see that the fancy bike you wanted has a super high indicative price because it uses up a lot of valuable resources. Seeing that, you might adjust your request. The worker councils do the same, tweaking their plans based on consumer demand. Step 4. This process goes back and forth. Propose, get feedback, revise, propose again for a few rounds, until a coherent, feasible, and fair plan is agreed to by everyone. It's a way to coordinate the whole economy without a central boss or a chaotic market.
Okay, this brings us to the elephant in the room, the biggest, most common objection that the book sees coming a mile away. The idea that this is all a lovely fantasy, but it would never, ever work because of human nature, right? Aren't people just too selfish, too lazy, too greedy for a system like this to survive?
The book tackles this argument head-on. It uses this quote from the anarchist Volin to suggest that the argument about the incapacity of the masses has, throughout history, been a very convenient excuse for people in power to stay in power. It's an argument that essentially says, we need them because the rest of us just can't handle it.
But here's the book's real counterpunch. It's this question. The authors argue that what we call human nature isn't this fixed, rigid thing. A huge part of it is simply a response to the environment we're in. If you put people in a system that rewards greed and competition, well, you're probably going to see a lot of greedy and competitive behavior. So the book asks us to flip the script and imagine, what kind of people would we become? What parts of our nature would come to the forefront if we lived in a system that rewarded solidarity and empathy instead?
And so, this explainer of Parecon leaves us right here with this question. It turns the whole thing back on us. It asks us to just set aside for a minute what we think is realistic or possible, and instead just focus on what is desirable. If we could wipe the slate clean and start over, what values would you want to put at the very foundation of our economic life? That's the challenge and the question that the book leaves us all to think about.